chapter 16 of Second Chronicles, where he started reading about Asa in chapter 14 and 15 and 16. It said that his heart was perfect. I think it says but his heart was, he was a good guy. All right, he did that which was right before the Lord. But then at the end of his life, he did something no good. I mean, besides the fact that he was enraged at the prophecy that came to him, and threw the prophet in prison. And then he was told that, because of that, you'll have wars. Well, that's what he was told. And then they got mad. But okay, down here it says, Asa in the 39th year of his reign was diseased in his feet until his disease was exceeding great. Yet his disease he sought not the Lord, but to the physicians. So the Lord allowed him to die because he put his trust in the physicians rather than a Lord. Then it tells how he died, and the big folderol of how they buried him, laid him on the bed, was filled with sweet odors and diverse kinds of spices prepared by the apothecary's art. In a previous video, I mentioned the fact of God's Word being cheapened with the Alexandrian text. Alexandria is a city in Egypt. These are where God's Word were monkeyed with. The New Testament scrolls were taken by Origen. You don't need to look into this stuff. It's proven out through the versions and the errors that are in those things. But the versions began with the Revised Standard Version in the 1880s. After the Civil War, while the world was once again more concerned about the notion of money, the nation, that is, the nation of our own nation, the United States, was more concerned with product and industry. In the back rooms, men were working with God's Word, well, not God's Word, the texts that are supposedly older and more authoritative, but that's a deception of the devil that God is allowed to carry on, where those scrolls weren't used for many years. So all the scrolls of God's Word that were being rewritten, or were copied, those were the original ones of those were used up and broken down and, eventually discarded. Well, a lot of them weren't. That's why they were pulled together for the translation of God's Word. The King James Bible with the fellas back in the 1600s. But the Alexandria texts, in the meantime, were well preserved, thought to be older, because those texts were older than any of the existing ones that the folks had access to that translated God's true word, the King James Bible. So those guys monkeyed with the Bible back in the 1880s, while after the Civil War, while the country was at rest, while everybody was more concerned about money. You know what also happened during the Civil War? That was where I'd wondered about this, and I saw something on the History Channel. Our modern day technique of burial and preserving bodies, the embalming, which was something that was perfected by the Egyptians, who worried more about their bones and preserving of their bodies. They were the ones who it mentions in the Bible, the apothecaries and all that. The apothecary's art. This happened in the Civil War at the beginning, where these men who thought they would make money, of course, it's once again the deal. They'd go out and they'd find dead soldiers who they knew through, description or dog tags. I don't know if they had dog tags back then, but somehow they'd go out through the battlefields, they'd find a dead corpse, embalm them, work the embalming thing so that they could then transport the dead body to the rich family member in Boston, let's say, and make a lot of money so that the parents could pay their respect. The guys were just buried in mass graves, but the rich folks could have these guys sent down there, and they learned, again, the apothecary's art right around that same time in our nation's history. As we give way to the learning of the Egyptians the Alexandrian texts, monkeyed with in Egypt. Egypt is a picture of the world. I believe the Antichrist will come out of Egypt. The Antichrist may already be among us, who was more than likely born in Egypt, as was Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. When Abraham sinned and went further down south, when God had not directed him into that land, that's mentioned in, I'm not sure what, Genesis, early on in Genesis. And then in Genesis 12, I think it is, where Hagar is mentioned and then gives birth to Ishmael, whose proclamation of his birth sounded much like Jesus's. But he shall be, instead of he shall be great and shall be called the Son of the Highest, he shall be a wild man. All right, once again, Egypt, picture of the world. Throw out those versions of the Bible if you're reading them or looking to them for help. Ask God for help. God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not will answer your questions regarding God's Word. And I appreciate those of you that have stopped by and that join me on live stream, and eventually the folks who will hear the reading of God's Word that's recorded on audio daily. So I'm going to stop the recording here. So I can hit the button. There it goes. And live stream folks, I was going to sing you a song on this video, but this file's gone a little too long, so I'm going to have to make a separate video regarding a song, and I'm praying the Lord will give me one for my mom again today.